Welcome back, everyone. For today's lesson, we're going to focus on one of my favorite composers of the early Romantic period, the Viennese composer Franz Schubert. So here you see Schubert's birth and death dates, born in 1797, died in 1828. So he died at the age of 31. A trend that unfortunately would continue throughout the Romantic period for these great romantics who died tragically young and left behind an incredible legacy of music. In the case of Schubert, we have about 1,000 pieces that survived by him, which is really extraordinary considering his short lifetime. In addition to 9 symphonies, many great examples of chamber music, piano music, choral music, Schubert's greatest contribution, and in the eyes of many connoisseurs, his finest pieces, are his songs. So the German term for song is Lied, and the plural of that is Lieder. We don't have an exact number of Schubert songs, but it's approximately 600, and Schubert found the genre of the Lied to be extremely compatible with his way of writing. He was able to compose songs quickly. As a matter of fact, in the year 1815, he wrote over 100 songs in that year alone. He was also able to select poetry by many of the great contemporary poets of his time and be able to use his incredible abilities at the keyboard to demonstrate all sorts of different ways that both the voice and the piano can be used to express what is happening in a song. Schubert is not the first composer of Lieder. We can go back and we can look at examples by Mozart or examples by Haydn or some wonderful songs by Beethoven. But he was the first composer to make song front and center in his compositional output, in the same way that Chopin in the next generation is going to make piano music front and center in his output. Schubert's songs can be divided into 2 main categories, what we call the solo songs and the song cycles. So the solo songs are obviously songs typically for one voice and piano. It's possible to have songs with more than one singer, but usually one voice and piano, German poetry. And then song cycles. A song cycle is a collection of songs intended to be performed as a unit, usually by a single poet. There are examples of song cycles, especially later in the 19th century, that have more than one poet, but most of them are for one poet, featuring one poet. And although song cycles, movements from those song cycles are often performed today in recital as individual pieces, they were originally intended to be performed as a complete unit. Schubert's 2 most famous song cycles were both composed at the end of his life, Winter's Journey, O Winterreise, and then another collection called The Lovely Maiden of the Mill. Schubert's songs use a wide variety of styles, both for the voice and for the piano. And I wanted to just demonstrate or play a couple of short examples of what I mean by these different styles. There are also different styles in terms of the form of the song. So the first style is what I like to call Schubert's folklike style, where the accompaniment is kept deliberately simple, the vocal line is fairly simple, and most of these folk-like songs are in strophic form. So we've talked about strophic form going all the way back to the Middle Ages and the troubadours and trouvères, but again, it just means you've got multiple verses of text with the same music for each verse. This song called Wild Flower, or Wild Rose, Heidenröslein, uses poetry by arguably Schubert's favorite poet of all, Johann Wolfgang von Goethe. Some of you may know Goethe's famous play Faust, which has been set both in symphonic form and as an opera by more than one composer. And but in this case, this is a little bit lesser known poem by Goethe called Wild Rose. And I want you to notice how simple the vocal line is and how simple the accompaniment is. We'll listen to the first verse and a little bit of the second verse. In this case, Heidenröslein is sung by the wonderful American soprano Renee Fleming.
Sein Knabe ein Röslein stieg, Röslein auf der Heide, war so jung und morgenschön, lief schnell
verse 2.
Knabe sprach, ich spreche dich.
Okay. If you go and listen to the entire song, you'll hear that all three verses use basically the same music. So it's possible for the composer to make little minor changes because each verse is going to have, in many cases, some changes of text, but it still is basically the same for all the verses. The second style, which I refer to as Schubert's pictorial style, also brings into focus the second of the three major forms that Schubert tends to use for his songs. It's what is called modified strophic. So in modified strophic songs, you're going to have music that repeats, but you're also going to have music that changes. So in the case of the song we're going to listen to, Schubert has the first two verses identical, and then he makes some changes in the music, both in the voice and the piano, in the third verse. And so that's what we mean. There's a modification, as the title implies, of the original strophic form. This is one of Schubert's most famous songs called Die Forelle, meaning the trout. So it's one of those typical 19th century romantic scenes where you're out in nature by a babbling brook, and there's a fisherman in the water trying to catch dinner, essentially trying to catch the trout. And someone is observing from the side and notices that the fisherman muddies the water so that he can stick his spear, through the fish and catch him and get him ready to bring home. And so you're actually going to hear in the piano part it's called the trout motive, a chromatic running line that very much imitates the motion of the fish through the water. Schubert admired this song so much that he decided to base an entire chamber piece on this, known as the Trout Quintet. So if you have a chance to listen to the Trout Quintet, you will hear a theme and variations movement that uses this exact melody. So here is the opening of Schubert's song, The Trout, also sung by Renee Fleming. The trout motive.
In einem Bächlein helle, da schoss in blauer Eil die launische Forelle vorüber wie ein Pfeil. Ich stand an dem Gestade und sah in Süßeron des bunten Fischleins Bahn, im klaren Bächlein so, des bunten Fischleins Bahn, im klaren Bächlein so.
Second verse.
Ein Fischer mit der Rute.
Okay, so you get the idea. The last song I want to talk about happens to be one of Schubert's first great songs and is continued to be recognized as, without question, one of his most famous songs. When Schubert was still a teenager, 17, 18 years old, he wrote two songs to poetry by Goethe. One is called Gretchen at the Spinning Wheel, which is actually based on an episode from Goethe's play Faust. So the character Gretchen has fallen in love with the philosopher Faust, and her feelings are already very intense and very, very specific for him, despite age differences and so forth. And so it's very typical German romantic sort of sentiment to have this, unrequited love feeling. And then the second song is called the Earl King, or in German, Earl König. This is based on a German legend about this kind of dark spirit that haunts the forest and kidnaps children as they're walking or riding through the forest. And so within the song, Schubert actually differentiates the characters in this ballad. That's the technical term for it, where you've got multiple characters being presented. So there's the father, there's his son, there's the Earl King, and then there's the narrator. All of them are presented using different ranges, sometimes in different keys. So it's a real challenge for the singer to be able to differentiate those different figures. There's a remarkable sense of drama and dread in this song especially as they're, galloping through the forest, and you'll actually hear the galloping horse in the piano. The key is G minor, so it requires not only a good singer, but a real singer-actor to be able to pull this song off. This is what is called through composed form. The song is in through composed form, in German durchkomponiert, meaning that each verse of text is going to have music that is different and that will match the dramatic situation of the individual verses. So I'd like to play a bit of the opening of the Earl King, in this case sung by the wonderful baritone Matthias Goerne. But listen for that galloping melody or that galloping accompaniment in the piano as the song starts. First voice you'll hear is the narrator saying the father and son are riding through the forest.
Wir reiten zu spät durch Nacht und Wind. Es ist der Vater mit seinem Kind. Hat den Knaben wohl in die Wahr. Fasst ihn sicher, hält ihn an.
And you hear the father. My son, what do you see there in the distance?
Mein Sohn, was willst du so lang dein Gesicht?
The father says, don't you see the Earl King?
Siehst Vater, du den Erlkönig nicht? Den Erlkönig mit Kron und Schweif. Mein Sohn,
Father again.
es ist ein Nebelstreif.
The Earl King.
Du liebes Kind, komm, geh mit mir.
So the Earl King's music is very seductive and very, very intense. And so to give away the punchline, at the end of the song, the father arrives home with his, they're galloping through the forest. The father arrives home with his son in his arms, and his son is dead. In seinen Armen was Kind war tot, in the original poetry. So you'll want to go and listen to that. There are actually several different settings by other composers of the Earl King, but none is more famous than Schubert. So this is just a very short introduction to the wonderful songs of Schubert. I hope that you will take the time and go and listen to the entire songs, the entire examples that I've only played parts of. Listen to the complete songs on your own, and listen to many other songs of Schubert. The last thing I want to mention as we wrap up is just a bit about the context of where Schubert's songs were first performed. Today, when you go and attend song recitals and things like that, it's performed in a formal setting, in a concert hall, in a church, in some other place where people are sitting and listening quietly and respectfully. But in Schubert's time, songs, because the idea of a recital of songs was really not a thing until the mid to late 19th century, Schubert, his songs were often performed in the living room of his friends. These are what were called evenings with Schubert, or Schubertiade. Schubert had many friends who were poets, playwrights, actors, and so it would often be that they would get together on a Saturday night and read poetry, and then Schubert had a good friend who was a very fine baritone and get up and sing Schubert's latest song, and he'd receive feedback and so forth. So it was in that environment, rather than a public environment, where many of Schubert's songs were first heard. And so that explains the wonderful intimacy that is such a hallmark of Schubert's songs. So that brings this particular lesson on Schubert's Lieder to a close. So thank you again for your attention, and we will see you next time.